Good day, everyone. Thank you for having me here today and being able to discuss with you guys an idea or having 5 ideas on how to work with your buyers effectively. This is something that will help you grow your business because a lot of the times people have a limited mindset or limiting beliefs that certain things are a certain way. As a matter of fact, a few days ago, I was talking to one of the people I was mentoring, and the agent was mentioning to me that he's not that good at listing properties yet. But to be honest with you, we are all in the same boat. The difference is the relationships that we build and the trust that we have from the people that we want to work with or who wants to work with us. So it makes a big difference when you have ideas in terms of how you would approach your buyer in regards to being able to grow your business through that buyer. A lot of the times we're focused on just the buyer itself, but there's a lot of peripherals within that buyer that will allow you to grow your business. And today that's what we're going to be discussing. We're going to be discussing how to be able to grow your business one buyer at a time, and with each buyer, be able to get a referral source and be able to understand how to grow your center of influence through that particular buyer. So it's the power of exponential growth. This is basically what we're going to be looking at when we're looking at the 5 ideas. So the first thing that I want to discuss with you guys is buyers being the active income producer for your business. This is something that a lot of the times we don't really see as much. Some people want to focus on listings alone, but listings are more passively, I guess the transaction or the process is more passive on the listing side than when you're working with a buyer, because the buyer creates the transactions. So when you have a buyer, your likelihood of getting a contract is much greater than if you have a listing waiting for a buyer to come in. So that's the biggest difference between working with a listing with a seller and working with a buyer. So that's what we're going to be discussing today. So the buyers create the transactions. Always keep that in mind when you're trying to grow your business. If you want to do a lot of transactions, this is the way to go. But at the same time, sellers, listings, attract buyers. So there's going to be a ratio that I'm going to give to you later on down our process here when we're talking about this, and give you an idea what it takes for each listings to actually how much buyers you should be getting for each listings that you have. There's a correlation between the two because the listings attract the buyers. It's like the honey that brings in the bee. So buyers dictate what price you would sell a property. This is another thing that you want to understand, that your buyers, depending on what price range your buyers are qualified for, is pretty much they're going to dictate what your commission is going to look like as well. So if you're working with high-end buyers, right, likelihood you're going to have a little bit less competition the higher the amount goes. But then it's harder for you to find those buyers to begin with because there's not many of them. And there's not a lot of listings that sell as the amounts get higher. Give you an example. If it was $300,000, there's more buyers that can afford to buy $300,000 of a property than a $2 million property. So if you focused on trying to create volume, the $2 million is not going to be where your numbers will be. It's going to be closer to the $300,000-$500,000 range, where you will attract the more buyers in that particular price range. But at the same time, in the market we're in, the inventory is a little bit less or a lot less. So what you're finding is in that particular price range, you're competing a lot more. And it's much more difficult to actually ratify contracts because sometimes you walk in there, you write an offer, and there's 5, 6, 7, 10 people you're competing with. So the way I've managed to ratify contracts a lot of the times, and what I've seen in this kind of market, this competitive market, a lot of the times people are removing certain contingencies. Of course, the more contingencies you remove, the more risk the buyer takes. As long as you keep your buyers aware of those risks, then it would be more manageable in terms of your liabilities on your end. So sometimes people remove appraisal contingencies. Sometimes people limit appraisal contingencies where if the property doesn't appraise, they will be willing to pay $5,000, $10,000 more than appraised value, or whatever number that is. So it's all those things are negotiated with your buyer. But essentially, you want to be a consultant when you're approaching your buyer. You want to have a consultative approach to your buyer. You don't want to dictate what the buyer should do, because at the end of the day, if it goes through the whole transaction and you go towards the closing, your buyer could get cold feet if they're not the one who came up with the idea. So there's certain things that I would recommend for you to do when you're working with your buyers is to make sure that the idea comes from the buyer. See, the best people that can influence others out there are the ones who are able to get the idea to come from the person that they're trying to influence. So essentially, you create a framework so at the end of the communication, the buyer would want to do what you're asking them to do without directly telling them. So give you an example. If you found 4 properties, right, and likelihood of ratifying 3 out of the 4 properties are very slim, but you have one that it's a good chance for them to get because it's been on the market longer. And in a market like this, the longer the property on the market, the more likely that you'll have a better chance of getting the property. But at the same time, you go out there and start showing the properties, it's up to you how you influence that person to actually buy the property that they can more than likely have a chance to get. You would know this because if you've been showing houses, this year particularly, and half of the year last year, it's been a very challenging time for a lot of the agents that are working with buyers, because your likelihood of winning contracts statistically is, from what I've seen, is about 1 out of 5, 1 out of 7. So you have to write 5 to 7 offers on average for each buyer that you're working with in order for you to actually win contracts. Now, when you start removing these contingencies, you have a better chance, but then you have a higher risk of liabilities later on with your buyers. So you have to really create that balance. It's like it's a balancing act between working and making sure the liabilities and the risk for your buyers are as low as possible. And if your buyers are willing to take those risks, which I've had buyers are willing to take those risks, but I let them tell me that they're willing to take those risks. But I do explain to them every single time that depending on what your chances are, you want to increase your chances, these things need to happen. So it depends on how badly they want a home, right? And also it depends on the property itself. So the last few contracts that have been ratified, that I was able to ratify in the past 30 to 45 days, like 4 or 5 buyers that I settled in the past 45 days, basically those buyers were willing to remove appraisal contingencies and home inspection contingencies, which obviously is much higher risk, but they're the one who volunteered to do that. So when you manage the expectation, you explain to them what the risk looks like and the probability of getting the property. If they're willing to take that risk, then that's okay. That at least you've already explained it to them, not telling them you have to do it this way in order for you to get the house. No, you tell them like 90% chance you're going to get this if you remove appraisal contingencies. It's not even 100%, of course, because, I mean, there's really no guarantees in any offers that you put out there. But 90% chance you get this if you remove the appraisal contingency, home inspection contingency, like 70% chance you're going to get this. And you kind of gauge and figure out what direction they want to take. And if they actually tell you, you know what, I want the 90%, do whatever it takes, go ahead and remove the appraisal contingency, go ahead and remove the home inspection contingency, and things like that. So that's really up to you on that part. Now, pricing is a factor before, but removing appraisal contingencies became a bigger factor, because even if you price it high, the offer that you write on a property, let's say the property is $400,000, you offer $450,000. If the listing agent as well as the market can only handle $425,000 for more than likely an appraisal value, then your 450 is really not meaningful as much as somebody's willing to offer 425 and removing appraisal contingency. Because what happens is the property doesn't appraise, the contract dies unless all parties agree for a particular price. Well, if the expectation of the seller is to sell for 450 and your transaction ends up coming short, let's say even at 420, right? With an appraisal contingency, it kills the contract. So that's the reason why you have to be very careful and making sure that you manage expectation, you let your buyers know about that. So essentially, the buyers dictate the price. So this is basically the most basic thing, even though appraisals actually have a say to it, but essentially your value of any property is based on what a buyer is willing to pay for it. That's what it boils down to.